Welcome to The Explainer. So, today, we're going to dig into an idea that's so ancient, so widespread, it was basically common sense for thousands of years. And yet, today, it's been almost completely forgotten.
Okay, so what is this idea? For literally millennia, across all sorts of cultures, this one fascinating concept just keeps popping up. The idea that we each have a subtle body. You know, an invisible kind of energetic twin that exists right alongside our physical one.
Now, I get it. It's super easy for us, with our modern, rational minds, to just wave this off as, old-school superstition. But one scholar, G.R.S. Mead, writing way back at the start of the 20th century, basically said, hold on a second, maybe we shouldn't be so quick to just toss this idea onto the scrap heap of history.
So Mead, he basically became this intellectual detective. He started digging through all this ancient Western philosophy to figure out what this whole subtle body doctrine was really about. And honestly, what he found is pretty mind-blowing.
And here's the thing, Mead wasn't trying to get people to believe this on blind faith. Not at all. He just said, look, let's treat this as a working hypothesis, a really useful framework, a way to maybe make sense of all these weird phenomena about human personality that, let's be honest, don't really fit neatly into our current boxes.
All right, so let's get down to it. What did these old-school philosophers actually mean when they talked about a subtle body? Was it a ghost? Was it the soul? Or was it something else entirely?
Well, the later Platonists, they were super specific. They called it soma pneumatonikon, which translates to spirit body. And get this, they didn't see it as some supernatural, spooky thing. For them, it was a real physical entity, just made of a much finer, more dynamic kind of matter than our regular, clunky physical bodies.
And they thought that after we die, this spirit body sticks around, but it changes. It becomes what they called the eidolon or skia, which means the image or shade of the person. It basically separates from what they beautifully called the shell-like physical body.
And this brings us to a really important point they made. The subtle body was not the soul, not the same thing at all. The soul, they said, was completely non-physical, pure, immaterial essence. The subtle body, that was its ride, its vehicle. It was the instrument that allowed the soul to actually do stuff in the world.
Okay, so this idea of a vehicle for the soul that you could actually work on, that you could refine and transform, this wasn't just some abstract philosophical idea. Mead argued it was the secret key to unlocking one of history's most mysterious and, let's face it, misunderstood practices.
Right. Alchemy. When you hear that word, what do you picture? Probably some guy in a dusty lab trying to turn lead into gold, right? Well, Mead drops a bombshell here. He says the real alchemists, they couldn't have cared less about actual physical metals. All those weird cryptic texts they wrote, the ones talking about philosophic earth and black crows and red lions, Mead says those weren't literal chemistry instructions. It was a code, a symbolic language. These alchemists saw themselves as investigators of nature's soul, working with the invisible formative forces behind the physical world.
So what does that mean? It means the whole alchemical process, the whole idea of transmutation, was a giant metaphor for an inner, psychological journey. The lead they wanted to transform wasn't a metal, it was their own subtle body.
And their method, when you look at it this way, is just brilliant. The lab, that wasn't some room full of beakers. It was the human body itself. The fire wasn't a Bunsen burner. It was the intense focus of deep meditation and self-reflection. And the gold, the final product, that was a perfected spiritual self, hatched from the philosophic egg of your own inner nature. How cool is that?
But Mead's detective work didn't stop with alchemy, not by a long shot. He started seeing the fingerprints of this same doctrine hidden in plain sight all across the ancient world.
He realized that this idea of an inner, subtle body wasn't just some one-off concept. It was a central thread, a common denominator running through so many of the great mystical and philosophical systems of the ancient world.
I mean, look at this list. He tied it to the high-minded astrology of the ancients, the super-mystical Chaldean oracles, various Gnostic schools that were all about finding inner knowledge, and even the secret rituals of the powerful Mithraic cult, a group that was a serious rival to early Christianity.
And for those philosopher astrologers, this wasn't just a side note, it was everything. They believed that a person's inner nature, their subtle body, was a perfect miniature of the entire universe, a microcosm of the macrocosm. So to understand yourself, was to understand the cosmos, and to understand the cosmos was to understand yourself.
And here's a huge clue that connects the dots. The alchemist Zosimus, who's one of the earliest ones we know of, actually wrote that the #1 secret of his art was the exact same as the most hidden mystery of the Mithraic religion. Now that's huge. It suggests this whole idea of transforming yourself through your subtle body was the central, closely guarded secret in a lot of these really powerful ancient movements. So after following this hidden history through all these different traditions, you got to ask the big question. Why should any of this matter to us today, in our modern scientific world?
Well, Mead thought this concept offered something that we might just desperately need today. A bridge, a way to connect two worldviews that, most of the time, seem to be in a constant state of war with each other.
Think about it. On one side, you've got pure materialism, which is great at explaining the physical world, but really struggles to explain something like consciousness. And on the other side, you have pure spiritualism, which can sometimes feel totally disconnected from physical reality. The doctrine of the subtle body, well, it offers a potential middle ground. A link, something that's material but not in the way we usually think of it, connecting our objective body with our subjective mind.
And all this brings us to one last really big question, one that connects this ancient idea right back to our world today.
So here it is. In an age of things like quantum fields and subtle energies, is it really so crazy to give this ancient superstition a second look? Is it possible that what these ancient thinkers, through intense self-observation called the spirit body, was just their way of describing a fundamental level of reality, a kind of energetic blueprint for our physical form, a reality that maybe, just maybe, our own science is only now beginning to explore with different tools and a completely different language? It's definitely something to think about.